Part 44. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 431. Seeing that Lin En already knew it, the women didn't know what to say, so they just waited for Lin En to decide. Lin En thought for a while, there is no doubt that the earth cannot stay here anymore, so we have to bring them all to the Kyushu territory. Lan 11's eyes suddenly flashed, received from Juzhu territory. Lin En nodded, temporarily take them to the Juzhu territory, and then send them back after the situation calms down. Lan 11 paused, what if they come to Juzhu territory and don't want to leave? Lin En smiled, you have to leave even if you don't want to. The Kyushu territory is a place where modern people live. Culture, technology, and various levels are not on the same level, and there is no way to integrate. With that said, Lin stood up, with a bit of domineering light flashing in his eyes. What's more, I don't want a large number of humans from Earth to be mixed into the Kyushu territory. The Kyushu territory is just me, the Kyushu territory. However, it is okay to let some people observe modern people's lives, customs, and architectural features, which can make the reconstruction of the Earth more diverse. Lin En spoke his thoughts while several women listened quietly. After a moment, Lin En waved his hand, and a crack in space appeared. Lin En said calmly, let's go. The women nodded, and the 5 of them stepped into the space crack. Earth. Yizhan is arranging personnel to handle the order here. Since people from the 4 major cities in the east, west, south and north have all poured into the area of the Promised City, the Promised City now seems a bit crowded. However, under the coordination of Yizhan, the sky above has been divided into 5 areas, with people from each city occupying one area. The order here is not chaotic. As soon as Lin En and the other 5 appeared, countless eyes immediately gathered around them. It's Mr. Lin Di. Great. Lord Lin Di is here. We are saved. Mr. Lin Di is here to save us. With Lord Lin Di taking action, these disasters will definitely come to an end. Great. A lot of discussion began to sound, and more people noticed Lin En's arrival, and they immediately focused on Lin En. There is no doubt that the vast majority of people are looking at Lin En with hope. The people's hearts, which were originally a little frightened due to various disasters, surprisingly began to stabilize with Lin En's arrival. It was as if a glimmer of light appeared in people's hearts in an instant, and they had a backbone. There is a figure standing in front of the 5 areas. They are the rulers of each city. At present, they naturally feel the changes in people immediately. At this moment, everyone has a little complexity in their hearts. As the rulers of the city, they were unable to stabilize the people's hearts when this disaster struck. On the contrary, Lin En's arrival, without even saying a word, just standing there, had the effect of their efforts for so long. None of them worked. It can be said that Lin En's existence seems to be the center of the entire world. Not far away, Yizhan was also standing there, with the same rich and complex look in his eyes, but more importantly, there was a sense of pride. This is his immediate boss, the human emperor. No need to speak at all, just standing there, but it can bring hope to everyone. This is Emperor Lin. At this moment, Lin En looked around, and the situation on all sides quickly fell into his eyes. Lin hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Everyone, I already know what happened on Earth. The disaster broke out and our homes were destroyed. I am saddened by this and extend my condolences to those compatriots who died. However, don't worry, everyone, I will not see you homeless. The current Earth is obviously no longer suitable for habitation. I will take you back to the Kyushu territory to temporarily avoid the danger. After returning to the Kyushu territory, I will order the deputy commander of the war to select some talents, follow the deputy commander of the ground, and together with the deputy commander of the sky, travel around the Kyushu territory and absorb some different concepts of the Kyushu territory. When the disaster is over, I will take you back to the earth. At that time, the talents who traveled with the deputy commander of the sky will combine the concepts of the Kyushu domain and work together with you to build a brand new earth. Come. Although this disaster has brought a devastating blow to the earth, because of this, after the disaster, everyone will work together to build a brand new earth. In the future, you will have a new home. Lin An's words came out and rumbled back to everyone's ears, and the information in them also flashed through their minds quickly. Emperor Lin is mighty. Emperor Lin is mighty. Emperor Lin is mighty. Emperor Lin is mighty. I don't know who shouted this voice, and then it formed a wave, overwhelming the sky and the earth. High-pitched voices shouted from people's mouths, and exciting eyes flashed from people's eyes. There is no doubt that Lin's words are undoubtedly bringing them a new life. After a moment, Lin An raised his hand and pressed down, and the sound here suddenly disappeared. Lin An spoke again, "Before I take you back to Earth, you will temporarily live in the Kyushu territory, and I will create an area specifically for you. I hope that during the period of temporary residence in the Kyushu territory, everyone can abide by the rules and stay safe. When this painful period is over, the Earth will be reborn." Lin An's words were not very exciting, but just a plain voice, but inexplicably, it aroused the emotions of countless people. Lin An smiled, "Okay, let's stop here. Now, I will pick you up in batches. Welcome to Zhu." As he said that, Lin An glanced at Yizhan, "Deputy Commander, you stay here to maintain order for a while." Yizhan immediately clasped his fists and accepted the order. Lin An raised his hand and waved, and a space crack emerged. However, compared with the past, this space crack is extremely huge, and it is thousands of meters long. The violent space turbulence emerged in it and fell into the eyes of many people, which immediately attracted countless people's eyes. Lin An waved his hand again, and a light curtain spread out, covering all the people in one direction, and then the light curtain included the people and sank into the space crack. Lin An raised his foot and also stepped into the space crack. The ground is far away from the Zhu region, but it only takes a moment to travel through space. In front of the ancient tree of life, the space ripples, and Lin An's figure emerges here, followed by a huge purple gold light curtain, which wraps countless humans. Lin An raised his hand and waved, and the light curtain condensed into the void. Lin An said, "Everyone wait here for a moment. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 432. Just as he opened his mouth, the space began to fluctuate again, and Chen Daoming rushed over. Seeing this scene, Chen Daoming was slightly startled. "This is..." Lin An roughly explained it, and Chen Daoming suddenly realized it, but he was still shocked by Lin An's hand. With Chen Daoming guarding here, Lin An immediately shuttled through the space again and picked up another group of people. This process went back and forth 5 times. Finally, when the people in the 5 cities were all picked up, Lin An stood in the void. Now, each continent in the Zhu domain has its own life, and Lin An does not want to break the peace of the Zhu domain. And it is obviously impossible for humans to live in the universe, and they still need a piece of land as a habitat. These humans are not all strong, and there are still many ordinary people with low cultivation, and there are also many children. However, Lin An has naturally considered this situation a long time ago. At this moment, Lin An raised his hand slightly, and a supreme will gradually spread out. This will is obviously much stronger than when Lin An appeared on Earth, but in people's eyes, it feels a little illusory, and they just feel that Lin An has become a little mysterious. But Yizhan and other gods are not like this. Although they have not yet come into contact with the will, they can also feel what power Lin An is exerting, and it is much clearer than ordinary people. Like a mountain, like a sea, like an abyss, like a prison. These people can't help but feel ashamed, and Lin An's will has been condensed to the extreme. As Lin An's will condensed, a huge law fluctuation suddenly began to appear from the center of the will, becoming more and more vast and more condensed. The strong law fluctuation began to spread, and many people among humans couldn't help but have bright eyes. Their laws are exactly the same as the laws that appeared in front of them, all of which are Earth attribute laws. However, in front of the Earth attribute law exerted by Lin En, they have the illusion that they are as small as facing the power of heaven, like fireflies compared to the bright moon. As the law spreads, the land began to appear, appearing out of thin air in this void. The rich Earth attribute law became stronger and stronger, and the land above the sky was getting bigger and thicker. In the end, it was as big as a continent. Countless shocked eyes fell on it, especially those humans who followed the Earth attribute law. Their eyes were almost popping out. What is this? Creating a continent out of thin air. Is this something a human can do? Is this the strength of Lord Lin Di? Yi Zhan stood aside, with deep shock in his eyes. Such a scene is a miracle. After the construction of the continent, new laws appeared. Gravity law, life law. Countless law fluctuations emerged one after another, and the purple gold light in Lin En's eyes was as bright as the sun, exuding endless divine power. He had performed a similar process in the past, but now, there is an extra step of creating a continent out of thin air. However, these alone are not that difficult for Lin En now, but just a little more trouble. As time goes by, the construction of this continent is becoming more and more complete and perfect. In the eyes of the crowd below, the continent was like a floating island, which was round and regular, and had an inexplicable will all over it. On the other hand, Chen Daoming was not shocked much. After all, he had seen such scenes before. There were too many miracles that happened to Lin En. Time passed little by little, and soon after, Lin En finally put down his raised hands, and the purple gold light in Lin En's eyes, like the sun, finally converged. Finished? This scene is simply a miracle. Emperor Lin is Emperor Lin. This move is really blinding. Creating a continent, is this the power of the god of desolation? It's so terrifying. Voices of discussion began to come from below again. Seeing the island in front of them take shape, the shock in their eyes not only did not decrease at all, but became more and more intense. As they came back to their senses one by one, what Lin En did, what kind of facts it represented, became more and more profound in their hearts. Therefore, these people's worship of Lin En became even more high. Lin En ignored the discussions below. At this moment, he raised his hand and waved it. Countless humans wrapped in 5 light curtains floated to the floating island one after another. This emperor has built a habitat for you. Before the disaster on the earth stops, you will temporarily live on this island. Lin En's voice spread out, and many humans also floated to the island. Lin En waved his hand again and removed the purple gold light curtain that protected them. Suddenly, many people immediately spread over the island, and each of them showed a strong curiosity. Is this floating island created by Lin En himself as real as the earth? And Lin En himself exhaled slightly. I really became the savior, Lin En muttered to himself. Chen Daoming came at this moment, and Yi Zhan came with him. Maintain everyone's order, and I'll leave this matter to you. In addition, find some people who have a certain status and can assist you in rebuilding the earth in the future. Let's visit the Kyushu territory with the deputy commander of the sky. Seeing the two coming, Lin En spoke to them. Chen Daoming just thought for a moment and understood what Lin En meant, and he obeyed and handed over to Chen Daoming. This matter will cause trouble to the deputy commander of the sky. Chen Daoming was not rude, he also clasped his fists and said, Deputy Commander on the ground, there is no need to be polite. You and I are the presidents of this heaven and earth respectively, so there is no need to be polite. Yi Zhan cupped his fists and nodded. Lin En couldn't help but smile when he saw this situation. You can also take this opportunity to get familiar with each other. This deputy commander of the sky is the former commander of the Kyushu region. I became the deputy commander of the sky after I improved my cultivation. Speaking of which, when it comes to governing the world, this deputy commander of the sky is much better than a half-hearted person like me. The more he spoke, the stronger Lin An's smile became. Besides, this deputy commander of the sky has another identity, he is my father-in-law. Hearing this, Yi Zhan's pupils shrank immediately. With this level of identity, he was much closer to Lin An. And this deputy ground commander was promoted by me. He has a good view of the overall situation and is also the leader of the Xuanhuan tribe. I can rest assured that the ground will be left to him. You two share the sky and the ground. There will be a lot of benefits if you get along more. In fact, Lin An didn't need to mention this, the two of them knew it in their hearts, but Lin An also introduced the identities of both parties. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 433. After pulling the strings for them, Lin An didn't stop any longer and took the four girls back to the frosty sky. Living room on the first floor. Space fluctuations emerged, and 5 people appeared in the living room. Lin sat down on the sofa. King Ian and the others were not too formal and sat down casually. Lan 11, on the other hand, was at a loss for the first time at Lin An's home in the 9 Nether Realm. Lin An smiled and said, "This is your first time here. Let them accompany you to get familiar with this house later." King Ian chuckled, "Lan 11, our house is different from Dishan Palace. There are some things you may have never seen before." Lan 11 was stunned, looked around, and sat down nearby. However, after looking around, she found that there seemed to be something she hadn't seen before. For example, Lin An waved his hand, and a figure suddenly appeared on the black screen on the wall. Kimeng came up at this moment, took Lan 11's hand and explained, "This is called TV, you can watch TV." King Ian couldn't help but look weird. "You can watch TV on TV, aren't you talking nonsense?" "Well." Kimeng looked a little embarrassed and murmured for a long time, but she didn't say anything. "It's just something that can watch some shows. The principle is a bit complicated, so you just know that this thing can watch movies," Ban Meng said calmly on the side. King Ian's eyes suddenly lit up. Ban Meng is right. Watch TV shows when you are bored, and you won't be so bored. Kimeng snorted angrily, stood up, walked to the refrigerator not far away, and took out a can of drink from it. "Do you want a drink?" King Ian's eyes lit up. I want it. Saying that, King Ian began to explain to Lan 11 again, "That big silver thing is called a refrigerator. You can put food in it, and it has a very good refrigeration effect. The drinks will taste better after they are refrigerated." Lan 11's beautiful eyes flashed, then she leaned over to look around, and even opened the door and reached in. "Huh? It does seem to be quite cold." Lan 11's eyes lit up, then she turned to look at the people on the sofa. "You said the drink tastes better after it gets cold." King Ian nodded, "Yes." Lan 11 took out a can of drink. "Wouldn't it taste better like this?" As soon as the words fell, Lan 11's hand was suddenly wrapped in a thick layer of ice, and the drink in her hand was naturally submerged in the ice. King Ian couldn't help laughing. "That won't work. It won't work if it's too cold. It has to be just right to taste good." Lin held his head in his hands and his whole body was buried deep in the sofa. Seeing the girls chatting and laughing, Lin An's face showed a slight arc unconsciously. This is the first time Lin An and Lan 11 have met each other since they established their relationship and went into seclusion. I don't know if they had discussed it in advance or if they had a tacit understanding. In short, they didn't have any intention of mentioning the past. It seems that they have already acquiesced to Lan 11's joining. Lin An was naturally pleased when such a situation occurred. These girls are all very smart and make Lin's life difficult, and their lives are not much better. Obviously, they really acquiesced. What's more, the interactions in front of him all appeared in front of Lin An's eyes. Lin An could naturally see what the girls meant. Hey! If you get a wife like this, what else can a husband ask for? Lin An tilted his head and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. And just when Lin An was sighing in his heart, suddenly the voice of the ancient tree of life came into the living room. Lin. With this call, Lin immediately sat up straight, with a serious look on his face. The ancient tree of life rarely disturbs him. Once it comes to him, it means it has something serious to say. Therefore, Lin An's attitude was also a bit serious. Ancient tree of life. The voice of the ancient tree of life came again. Lin, I have also sensed the situation on Earth. Lin's eyebrows flashed. What did you find? The ancient tree of life responded with a somewhat heavy tone. There are indeed some discoveries. There is no doubt that the current disasters on the Earth are manifestations of the spiritual energy recovery progressing to a certain extent. How long the disasters on the Earth will last depends on how long the spiritual energy recovery progresses. I had already felt it when the spiritual energy recovery had just begun, but at that time, my sense of the initial recovery was still very vague. But with the current disaster, the aura on the Earth has become more and more obvious. I have encountered that aura before. Lin An's eyes suddenly flashed, and a hint of suspicion appeared in the depths of his eyes. You mean, you have encountered the breath of spiritual energy reviving? I know this. The ancient tree of life explained, I'm not talking about things from our time. What I'm talking about is that after I met you, I encountered that aura again. Lin An's eyes flashed solemnly. What's going on? The ancient tree of life said, do you still remember that when we were still on the Earth, you once asked me to take root in the depths of the Earth? Of course I remember. That's when I took root deep into the Earth. In the deepest part of the Earth, I seemed to have touched something very strange. I thought it was the origin of the Earth. Lin's pupils suddenly shrank. The origin of the Earth. That's right. It's the origin of the Earth. That breath is so strange that I can't make a mistake. And the breath that is emanating from the Earth now is exactly this breath. At the beginning of the spiritual energy recovery, I didn't feel very good, but with the emergence of disasters, this breath has become somewhat obvious, and I just remembered it. Lin An's eyes flashed with thought. So, the current spiritual energy recovery is dominated by the origin of the Earth. Why does it do this? It even caused disasters everywhere. Does it want to destroy the Earth? And the suppression of the will of heaven and earth. Speaking of this, your statement is obviously based on facts. The will of heaven and earth obviously comes from the origin of the Earth. After the spiritual energy is revived, the will of heaven and earth began to appear. But why? The origin of the Earth will suppress the humans in Jizhu, but not suppress humans in other times. Especially me. The suppression I suffer is almost equal to the sum of the suppression forces suffered by others. Why is it trying so hard to suppress me? The ancient tree of life fell into silence. It was obvious that it could not answer Lin An's questions. And the four girls of Lan 11 were even more confused. Lin An covered his forehead, with thousands of lights in his eyes. Do you think I can go and see the origin of the Earth? I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 434. The ancient tree of life was shocked, but when he thought of Lin An's bottomless strength, he felt relieved. It's not a bad idea, but it's very dangerous. We don't know what the origin of the Earth is like, whether it is good or evil, and whether it has its own consciousness. To put it bluntly, we know nothing about the origin of the Earth. If you go there rashly, there will definitely be great risks. Lin An couldn't help but look up, but if this goes on, the disasters on the Earth will never stop. What should we do? What if the Earth is really destroyed? What should we do? Do you want me to create an Earth? Although I am half a step away from eternity, I am asked to create an Earth. This idea is incredible just to hear. Lin An's face was full of bitter smiles, and the ancient tree of life fell silent. After a while, Lin An waved his hand. Forget it, I must go, but not now. Although I have some strength, I can't act rashly. Once I have an accident, humans will be in danger. Let's talk about this after I break through the eternal. Determination flashed in his eyes. Lin An is also a man of swift and decisive actions. At this moment, he no longer hesitated. He ran upstairs in a flash and only left a sentence on the first floor. I'm going to retreat. Eternal is out of retreat, call me if you have anything. The ancient tree of life heard it and didn't say anything. Lan 11 and the other 4 girls looked at each other and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He just came out of retreat and didn't say a few words, and he went back to retreat. He didn't spend a night. You know, Lan 11 hasn't slept with Lin An yet. But Lin An has already gone upstairs. What can the 4 girls do? They can only comfort each other a few words. Time began to pass like this again. For eternal, Lin An's inner momentum is also full of expectations, otherwise he wouldn't be so diligent in this retreat. In fact, Lin An has been interrupted several times on this eternal road, and his desire for eternity has become stronger and stronger. Eternity, the ultimate of thoughts? During this retreat, Lin An was so ruthless that he would never come out of retreat if he could not achieve eternity. Although it is not known whether there will be any really fragrant series of events in the end, there is no doubt that Lin An's heart is extremely firm. Fortunately, Lin An has brought all the humans on Earth to the Jiuzhu region, and the resettlement has been properly arranged, so there is no worry. As for the disasters on Earth, there are no humans on Earth anyway, so let those disasters roll as much as they want. At that time, restoring the operation of the land will only take a thought. Therefore, during this retreat, Lin An's mind was also extremely devoted, and the progress was much faster than the previous few times. Time passed quietly. That day, Lin An sat in his own hut, and there was no breath around him. Although there was no breath at all, this hut was full of Lin An's huge will. Xuanhuan is the initial application of will, and eternity is when will is truly formed. Once a thought is born, the world will change drastically, and it will be determined for eternity. At that time, Lin An will completely break away from his dependence on the laws of the earth, and truly reach the state where thousands of laws that belong to him will roar out with a wave of his hand. By then, he will have his own will like the earth, and even the will of the planet will not be able to affect him at all. To a certain extent, when he reaches eternity, he will stand on an equal footing with the origin of the earth. This is why Lin An insisted on waiting until eternity before going to the earth. If it is half a step into eternity, Lin An cannot predict whether he can resist once the origin of the earth is really hostile to him. After all, this is a planet. At this moment, Lin An's will is so huge that it exists in countless corners of the entire hut, and it is even about to overflow from the hut. However, at one moment, a mysterious suction force suddenly came out, just like 100 birds returning to their nests and leaves returning to their roots. All of Lin An's will return to Lin An's body in an instant. And in Lin An's body, earth-shaking changes began. All his laws began to shrink. His life will became the center of the strong contraction at this moment. Not only the life will, but also a little light overflowed from Lin An's closed eyes. That was purple gold and black gold. These purple gold and black gold, representing the light of law and collapse, seemed to be affected invisibly and overflowed in the direction of the contraction of the life wheel. In an instant, the contraction point of the life wheel seemed to become a black hole, trying to absorb all of Lin An. Faced with such a strange situation, Lin An's face did not change at all, and he did not make any movements, just letting the life wheel black hole change. I don't know how many years have passed. On this day, Lin An sat quietly, without any breath on his body, just like an ordinary person. His laws, collapse, will, everything, all disappeared. And in the place of the fate wheel, the original fate wheel has also disappeared, replaced by a golden sphere. This sphere is the source of the suction force like the black hole before. At this moment, the golden ball began to wriggle as if it turned into liquid, and gradually, it turned into the appearance of Lin En. The origin of will. The origin of will is formed, and the eternal shackles are gone. With the appearance of the origin of will, Lin En suddenly opened his eyes at this moment. The light of purple gold and black gold no longer appeared. Lin En seemed to have turned into an ordinary person, and no power could be seen in him. However, there was an invisible aura, like a protective film that wrapped Lin En's entire body. That is the eternal will. This is eternal. Looking down at his palms, Lin clenched his fists with a smile on his lips. Only when we truly reach eternity can we realize what eternity actually represents. Now, Lin En has a strong feeling that his will is the will of the entire world, and it is the supreme decree. Nothing in this sky or on this earth can disobey him. With one step, Lin En was outside in an instant. The floating island was still floating there. Lin En's mind swept across and briefly checked the situation of the floating island. After this period of time, the lives of those on the earth on the floating island were relatively stable. Feeling Lin En's will, Yi Zhan immediately flew out, but when Yazan saw Lin En, his face couldn't help but look a little strange. In Yazan's eyes at this time, Lin En was a little too ordinary. Yi Zhan really couldn't feel any fluctuations in Lin En's body, just like a real ordinary person. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yi Tiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 435. However, Lin En is Emperor Lin, how can he become an ordinary person? The current situation can only show one thing, that is, Lin En is stronger. It was so strong that it was unfathomable, so strong that he could no longer spy on it. What's more, although Lin En seems to be an ordinary person, Yi Zhan can feel a strange feeling that is not there. This feeling rose directly from the depths of his heart, as if he was going to obey Lin En's words, even if he was told to die, he would do it without hesitation. Yi Zhan didn't know the reason, but this feeling was deeply rooted in his heart. It had appeared the moment he saw Lin En. It was really weird. That's weird, that's weird. Lord Lin Di is even more terrifying. Sighing in his heart, Yi Zhan flew to Lin En, his expression tightened. Congratulations to Mr. Lin Di for your breakthrough in cultivation. Lin En looked calm. How have things been during these days? Did anything special happen? Yi Zhan's expression moved slightly, and the tension in his heart actually got a little more intense. He felt that sense of oppression, as if coming from a superior. This is not oppression in terms of status, but a fundamental difference in level. It seemed that Lin En was just speaking calmly, but Yi Zhan felt a huge pressure, like a huge stone pressing on his heart. It seemed that what stood in front of him was no longer the Lin En of the past, but a vast and magnificent world. Yi Zhan sighed inwardly. Needless to say, he could tell that Lin En's realm had definitely made a big breakthrough. In the past, Lin En was a god, so with this breakthrough, the result is obviously obvious. Eternal. Thinking of this, Yi Zhan couldn't help but clasped his fists again, reporting to Emperor Lin. Nothing major happened on the floating island, and the visit to the Kyushu territory has been successfully completed. Those who went to visit have gained a lot after coming back. Under their concept, new buildings have been built on the floating island. However, because people only live temporarily, there is no big fanfare in construction. Just for living needs. Lin En nodded lightly. He had just discovered that there were indeed many interesting buildings on the floating island. Mentioning those buildings, even Lin En couldn't help but feel very interesting. Lin discovered a complex of buildings. In that building complex, Most of the buildings inside were hundreds of meters tall, and they seemed to have hundreds of floors. They have learned from the high-rise buildings in the Kyushu region. This is not bad. In the future, the skyline of the Earth may be higher than that in the Kyushu region. Lin spoke, with a slight smile on his face. Speaking of this, Yizhan was also quite excited. This trip to the Kyushu region also opened my eyes. When the Earth recovers, they will definitely build a more beautiful city. Lin En nodded. I won't ask too much about these things, but I am happy to see that we can build a more beautiful Earth. The better people's lives are, the happier I am. Yizhan immediately clasped his fists in respect. Lin Emperor cares about the world, and the 4 words human race great emperor are definitely worthy of the name. Lin En smiled faintly. Okay, I won't have to say these words. You can go and do your work. I can rest assured that nothing will happen. Yizhan nodded and then retreated. Lin En looked at the world with a strange feeling in his heart. In the dark universe, huge ancient trees of life floated. In the eyes of Lin En today, this scene seemed a little imperfect. Especially, the existence of those laws in the Kyushu territory. That is the law of existence under the will of the earth. Those laws are still releasing the pressure of heaven and earth on the entire Joseon region, and the people in the entire Joseon region are suffering from oppression. In the past, Lin En could not feel anything wrong with those laws, but now, the existence of these laws seems extremely disharmonious. It's like a black and white landscape painting with a touch of mixed colors mixed into it. Now that I have become eternal, these laws should also be replaced. With my presence in this Joseon territory, it should no longer be oppressed by the will of the earth. If there are other wills that interfere with my territory, then I, the Eternal, will be too useless. There was a little strangeness in his eyes, as if he had seen through some nothingness. Lin En smiled and murmured to himself, shook his head secretly, and then suddenly raised his hand. As if wiping away dust, Lin En waved his palm in the direction of the Kyushu territory, making a simple movement. At this moment, Lin En still looked like an ordinary person, without any breath coming out, as if he was really just waving his hand. Even if there were other people here, they would laugh at Lin, like a dancing lunatic. However, with this simple wave, an unprecedented storm appeared in the entire Joseon region in an instant. A supreme will, as if crossing the void, suddenly appeared at one end of the ancient tree of life. As Lin En waved his hand, this terrifying will followed the direction of Lin En's wave and began to sweep across the Kyushu territory. With this huge will sweeping across, it can be clearly seen that the various laws that originally existed in the world suddenly began to collapse. No matter what kind of law it was, it began to completely collapse at this moment. In an instant, the sky collapsed and the earth shattered. However, after the collapse, new laws emerged, and the previous laws were restored in an instant. After the restoration, it seems that nothing has changed at all, exactly the same as before. If you look at it from a distance, the appearance of the scene is simply exaggerated to the extreme. The collapse and rebirth are all completed in an instant where the hurricane of will sweeps through. It seems that this will has brought a thorough innovation to the whole world. In front of the ancient tree of life, Lin En waved his hand for only a breath, and the terrifying hurricane of will in the distance also completed the sweep in this breath. This scene is really incomparable shocking. After a wave, Lin En put down his hand, and the storm of will in the distance also disappeared quietly. Lin En looked at the Joseon domain in front of him and nodded slightly, with a little satisfaction. Now, this Joseon domain no longer has the slightest sense of disobedience, but is naturally round and smooth. And the laws that originally belonged to the will of the earth have collapsed and disappeared at this moment, replaced by the laws generated under Lin En's will. This is a free world, a world that belongs to him, Lin En. And all these changes, like a new life, were completed just when Lin En waved his hand. In a wave. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 436. Zhuzhou Territory. In each city, cars are speeding and bringing up a gust of wind and waves. The viaducts that are winding like long dragons have embedded some appropriate embellishments for the city. Some people on the roadside are wearing formal business suits, with expressionless faces, and walking hurriedly on the streets. Even people in casual clothes are mostly taking big steps and rushing to their destinations quickly. In the Zhuzhou territory, most of them are cities with a very fast pace. And at this moment, there is suddenly a storm, carrying an unparalleled will, sweeping across this place in an instant. The speed of this storm is extremely fast, and it has spread out for an unknown distance in less than a blink of an eye, and it is difficult to feel its existence. However, a strange feeling suddenly rose from people's hearts, and even many people slowed down their walking speed. They can't tell what kind of changes are there, but they can feel that the world seems to be different from before. The people in some hidden places in Zhuzhou suddenly widened their eyes, with strong shock in their eyes. Those with low cultivation could not feel what happened, but they could vaguely glimpse the tip of the iceberg. That fluctuation was man-made. Although it is hard to imagine what kind of existence is making a move, there is no doubt that a powerful person has intervened in Zhuzhou. When the storm of will passed, they could clearly feel the root of the change between heaven and earth, which is the law. And with the change of the law, the suppression of heaven and earth that has always existed on them disappeared. What kind of existence made a move just now? My cultivation has recovered. The laws between heaven and earth have changed. What's going on? One after another, exclamations and discussions, and private voice transmissions began to appear in all directions of Zhuzhou. Outside Zhuzhou, there was a little satisfaction in Lin An's eyes, and he stared quietly at the current Zhuzhou. Lin An had a strong feeling that the current Zhuzhou domain could be regarded as his home. After the investigation of the matter on earth, we should also erase the will of heaven and earth on earth. After all, I am an earthling. Muttering to himself, Lin An was thinking, and suddenly, not far in front of him, several space fluctuations came suddenly. It was the 4 Kingian girls. At this moment, the 3 Kingian girls were a little excited, only Lan 11 was calmer. As soon as she saw Lin An here, Kingian immediately rushed over. "Brother, my cultivation has recovered." Lin An's eyes smiled. "How could my brother let you be suppressed all the time? This is our home." Ban Meng's beautiful eyes flashed. "So, you did all this?" Lin An smiled and nodded. Qi Meng paused. "You have touched the suppression of heaven and earth, you should be fighting against the whole heaven and earth. Have you broken through?" Lin An nodded again. "Eternal." Lan 11's eyes were shining. "Eternal, really broke through?" Thinking back to a few years ago, she had joked with Lin An and talked about the eternal, but she didn't expect that now, just a few years later, Lin An actually became the eternal. Lin An's face returned to calm. "I'm going to Earth." Several women couldn't help but change their expressions. Lan 11's face became a little more serious. "Are you sure?" Lin An turned slightly to the side and turned his head to look in the direction of the Earth. On his clear side face, there was a calm smile. "I am eternal. Even if I cannot defeat it, it cannot stop me. Now I can already vaguely feel that I am on the same level as it. Its combat power is still unknown, but I dare say that there will be no danger on this trip." Lan 11's face relaxed a little. "That's good." Lin An turned around and smiled. "Okay, before I leave, I have to do one more thing." "What is it?" Lin An sighed. "Of course I have to leave you some protection." After the voice fell, Lin An raised his hand and waved. It was also a very simple action. There was still not much fluctuation of the law on Lin An's body, but another will suddenly descended on the entire Zhuzhou domain. In an instant, an invisible storm spread across the entire Zhu domain in an instant, as if there was an unparalleled power descending here. This pressure was even stronger than the will of heaven and earth. I don't know how many people suddenly felt their hearts sink at this moment, as if a huge rock was pressing on their hearts, and a strong sense of oppression rose up. Even the 4 women around Lin An couldn't help but hold their breath. Is this the eternal? But there is such a pressure between waving hands, it's simply the collapse of the sky and the earth. At this moment, the 4 Kingian women beside him couldn't help but sigh in their hearts, especially Lan 11, the strange light in her beautiful eyes was particularly strong. This is the eternal. I want to achieve it too. Lin An naturally sensed the changes of countless people, but he didn't express it at all. As Lin An's will descended, within the scope of Zhu domain, there was suddenly a strong law fluctuation, and suddenly began to wreak havoc. This is not 1 or 2 laws, but almost all the law fluctuations. However, these law fluctuations seem to be chaotic, but they all spread in the same direction, which is the periphery of Zhu domain. As many laws approached, a purple gold light curtain gradually began to emerge, and finally evolved into an extremely huge purple gold light shield, covering the entire Zhu domain. There was a bit of satisfaction in Lin An's eyes, and then he raised his hand and waved again. As Lin An waved his hand again, the will that permeated the Zhu domain began to change, and then, a trace of collapse began to spread. This breath also spread to the surroundings of the Zhu domain, and finally condensed into a black gold light curtain, which enveloped the entire Zhu domain in the inner circle of the purple gold light curtain. 1 black gold and 1 purple gold, 2 giant light curtains, actually protected the entire Zhu domain, and the familiar light curtain is now at the eternal level. It can be said that the current Zhu domain is as solid as a rock. Unless there is an enemy of the same eternal level, there will be no more threats to the Zhu domain. After Lin An's transformation, the Zhu domain is now full of Lin An's will. Any enemy below the eternal level will be strongly suppressed here, just like the suppression of the will of heaven and earth on them in the past. Even enemies who are not at the eternal level, let alone invading the Zhu domain, they don't even have the ability to break through the 2 layers of light curtains set up by Lin An. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 437. After laying down 2 layers of light curtains, Lin An felt much more at ease, and then he withdrew his will. Is this the strength of eternal? King Ian's eyes were filled with excitement and a hint of curiosity. Lin An smiled faintly, stepped forward and rubbed his head, then thought for a while, and hugged the 4 girls one by one. Okay, I'm going to Earth. With 2 layers of light curtains, nothing below eternal will pose any threat to you, so I can leave with peace of mind. Lan 11's eyes were firm. Don't worry. I will definitely break through the godly wilderness, and then break through the eternal. Looking at the determination on that beautiful face, Lin An couldn't help but recall the past, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. I've watched you grow up all the way, and eternal is not a difficult thing. As long as you think you can do it, you can do it. Waving his hand, Lin An took a step forward, stepped into the space crack and disappeared. In fact, Lin An naturally couldn't say whether Lan 11 could enter the eternal age. The so-called eternal age was not difficult, which was just to comfort her. Eternity was not difficult. Then why was Lin An the only eternal age in the whole human race? Not to mention the eternal age, even the godly desolate, until now, only Lin An could reach it. Eternity was not easy, but it was difficult beyond imagination. Even Lin An took so long to reach it. You know, Lin An had almost no bottleneck in the past. What's more, when the godly desolate was close to perfection and Lin An was comprehending the laws, he almost lost his will in the vast universe many times. Godly desolate was not just talk, but eternal age was the real eternal age. At this moment, Lin An took a step and came directly to the earth. The moment his body appeared between heaven and earth, Chaos became Lin An's first feeling. Looking around, the earth was full of huge and terrifying cracks, with fiery red magma flowing in the cracks, and the intense high temperature made the air distorted terribly. And this was just above the earth. In the sky, there was a terrifying gale blowing at this moment. It was not a strong wind like a tornado, but just the most common wind, but the wind speed reached a level that even Lin An was a little scared. This level of wind was enough to blow the meteorites up. I still remember the meteorites from outer space falling that year. If there was such a level of wind on the Earth at that time, Lin An would not have needed to take action. Just this kind of storm was enough to blow those meteorites so that they could not land on the ground at all. Unless it was some extremely huge meteorites, it would be possible to break through the raging gale in the middle. Lin An felt the somewhat chaotic law fluctuations between heaven and earth, and his eyes were a little heavy. It seemed that the disaster on the earth was much more serious than he had imagined. Even when Lin An's thoughts swept across, there were areas near the sea, and countless lands seemed to be torn apart and floated into the endless sea, as if they had become small islands on the sea. If this continues, I'm afraid that this continent will be completely torn apart one day. The ancient tree of life once explored the origin of life deep underground, close to the center of the earth. Then the closest to the center of the earth is naturally the north and south poles. Lin An's eyes flickered, and after a slight thought, his figure flashed and disappeared. Earth, North Pole. Lin An's figure emerged, and as soon as he arrived here, Lin An couldn't help but change his eyes a little. At this moment, it was the Arctic Ocean of the Earth. However, the Arctic Ocean today has been occupied by endless waves. Looking around, there are wave tornadoes everywhere. However, what made Lin An's eyes change was that the moment he landed here, these waves seemed to have changed a little. One of the huge waves that swept across like a tsunami changed its direction abruptly the moment Lin An descended. A huge wave of 1,000 meters in size changed its direction abruptly. What a scene that was! Lin An's eyes sank, and a little dissatisfaction flashed in his heart. How could this be a simple influence of the law? It was clearly mixed with will. And where this will came from, it was naturally Sima Zhao's heart. Passers-by knew it. It was naturally the origin of the earth. Lin An had not yet shown any intention, just descended here, and the will of the earth had already shown such a state of rejection. This was already naked hostility. Why? Lin An's eyes were full of confusion. Seeing that the tsunami in the distance had gathered more sea water and the height was rising rapidly, Lin An waved his hand casually, and a will descended, slapping the tsunami away. The huge tsunami of thousands of meters was slapped away in an instant, and the waves and water curtains splashed everywhere. In the other direction, there was a waterspout that had absorbed an enormous amount of water, reaching a huge range of thousands of meters. Even the height of the waterspout was infinitely high, and it had already connected to the sky, rolling up the rolling clouds in the sky, and causing bright lightning. This was a waterspout that connected the sky and the earth. It's really a doomsday scene. Lin An glanced at it and was a little amazed in his heart. This kind of scene was really only seen in movies before, and he didn't expect to encounter it here. He raised his hand again, and the infinite will formed an indestructible giant palm of law, and slapped the waterspout thousands of miles away. This palm directly broke the waterspout connecting the sky and the earth. Countless waters splashed, and Lin An cast his eyes into the sea. This is the Arctic Ocean. If you go deeper from here, it will be the closest way to the origin of the earth. However, the origin of the earth has obviously discovered his existence. The tsunami and tornado just now are obviously the work of the earth's will. Although the means are a bit low-end, it is enough to see the attitude of the earth's will towards Lin An. Sure enough, this trip will not go smoothly. Lin An sighed. Thanks to Lin An's choice to break through the ancient times and come here, otherwise he would really be in danger. Before, even the tsunami and tornado that appeared earlier, Lin An needed to spend some cultivation to deal with it, which was far from being as easy as it is now. With a secret sigh, Lin An waved his hand again, and a cylindrical area appeared above the sea surface, which repelled the surrounding sea water, thus forming a vacuum cylindrical cave. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 438. This cave is about 2 meters in diameter, bottomless, and directly connected to the depths of the sea. And the sea water inside has been squeezed out. With this method, it is possible to enter the seabed calmly. Lin An's eyes flashed, and without hesitation, he flashed and went directly into the vacuum cave. Lin An's speed was extremely fast, like a stream of light, flashing through the vacuum tunnel in an instant. In this way, in just a few breaths, Lin An found that he was actually standing on the ground. It's just that the ground under his feet is not ordinary land, but soft fine sand. Lin An was just about to make a move, and suddenly a vibration came from under his feet. Lin An's eyes were a little helpless. Needless to say, it must be the origin of the earth that came to make trouble again. And as expected, after 3 or 4 seconds, the slight vibration under his feet turned into a strong earthquake. The momentum of that kind of vibration is comparable to a magnitude 10 earthquake. It's really a mountain-shaking earthquake. On the ground, there were cracks that began to spread wildly, and there were cracks that began to move up and down, and there was a crazy squeeze. In a blink of an eye, a small hill was squeezed out. On the other side, right under Lin An's feet, it began to tear wildly. The earth was cracking wildly, forming a crack that was several hundred meters wide. If Lin An had not floated in time, he would have fallen directly into the depths of the crack. However, this was not the end. Lin An looked down and found that there was red magma gushing out from the deep of the huge crack under his feet. Lin An was almost stunned. This scene was really extraordinary. Even the submarine volcano was dug out. The will of the earth wanted to dig 3 feet into the ground to drive Lin An away. Lin An waved his hand casually, and a black and gold light curtain appeared, wrapping him up, and Lin An himself began to descend with some laughter and tears. The magma below collided violently with the seawater, but Lin An ignored it and passed through it directly under the wrapping of the black gold light curtain and fell into the magma. Although the whole person entered the magma, Lin An was not affected at all under the wrapping of the black gold light curtain. The speed of diving became faster and faster. Instead, the magma that touched the black gold light curtain began to collapse and disappear silently. And Lin An began to descend rapidly. Lin An didn't know how far below, but his descent speed was extremely fast. It didn't take long for him to reach the depths of the magma. The mine spread slightly, and under Lin An's perception, it didn't take long for the end to appear in Lin An's perception. Here, it was a rock layer of unknown material. Lin An didn't stop at all, and directly leaned against the black gold light curtain and penetrated into the rock layer. As Lin An went deeper and deeper, Lin An could gradually sense that there seemed to be a strange breath, getting closer and closer to him. As Lin An got closer, he could feel that the spiritual energy around him seemed to be rising at a terrifying speed. The density of the spiritual energy was terrifying. When the density of the spiritual energy reached its peak, Lin An's figure suddenly stopped. Ahead, there was an empty area. There were no more rocks, but a hollow, just like a cave. The area of the cave was not very large, just about the same size as Lin An's bedroom on the top floor of the Emperor's palace. In this cave, there was nothing around, only in the center of the cave, there was a light blue shadow sitting quietly. As Lin An stepped into the cave, his expression changed slightly. The density of the spiritual energy in this cave was so dense that it was unimaginable. Taking a deep breath, Lin An looked at the pale blue shadow. This was a human-shaped shadow, but it was just a human-shaped one. His whole body, including his face, was completely pale blue. And on his body, Lin An felt a similar breath, as deep as an abyss or a prison. Eternal breath. It's just that this breath is not very strong, but even if it is not strong, it is still eternal. Having just stepped into the eternal realm, Lin An can be said to have no experience in the eternal battle. At this moment, seeing another eternal existence with his own eyes, Lin An's feelings about the eternal are a little more profound. The breath of the law on the other party is simply incompatible with the breath on Lin An's body. This is not due to the difference in the law, but because these laws are controlled by two completely different wills. It is precisely because of the difference in will that the breath of both sides will be like enemies, and hostility will appear subconsciously. As Lin An stepped in, the pale blue light and shadow stood up from sitting cross-legged. As he stood up, a completely different will began to rise from the other party, and the rich law fluctuations began to roar silently. Lin An suddenly felt that perhaps the eternal confrontation was a confrontation of wills. Whoever has a stronger will, whose law fluctuations will have a stronger crushing power. However, Lin An is a little different from the ordinary eternal. He not only has laws, but also collapse. Honkai has always shown extraordinary combat power, but until now, Lin An has only simply applied this Honkai power. This is not because Lin An is belittling himself, but as Lin An becomes stronger and stronger, his feelings become more and more profound. He had only detected the tip of the iceberg in terms of collapse fluctuations. At this moment, the light blue figure stood up. Without the other party taking any action, Lin An could already sense the deep hostility conveyed by the other party's will. Needless to say, Lin An thought, and outside the black gold light shield, there were 10 more layers of purple gold light shield, firmly protecting Lin An inside, while Lin An's eyes were simply locked on the light blue figure. After entering Eternal for the first time, Lin An also wanted to see what kind of methods this Eternal level light blue figure could possess and whether it could bring him some new discoveries. Under Lin An's gaze, the light blue figure slightly raised his hands. In an instant, the entire cave was filled with a terrifying will. The huge wave of will was as vast as a sea of smoke, occupying every corner of this place. Only Lin An's mask was still struggling and was not invaded by the will. In an instant, Lin An was like a lonely boat in the sea, as if it was swaying in the wind and rain and about to collapse. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 439. Lin An couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. His expression remained unchanged, but there was a hint of interest in his eyes. It's interesting. Hearing Lin An's whisper, the light blue figure suddenly seemed to be irritated, and the fluctuations of will around him suddenly became violent. If the God Emperor were here, he would certainly not be able to sense the fluctuations of those wills, but would be able to sense a strong sense of crisis. However, as an eternal, Lin An discovered the changes in those wills immediately. It seems that with the ups and downs of emotions, those wills have quietly begun to show their fangs. The violent aura of law began to condense and rage wildly, and extremely violent fluctuations began to rise rapidly in the cave, gradually forming a strong sense of oppression. As the laws and pressure intensified, phantoms of palms began to gather not far in front of Lin An. The shapes of these palms are different. They are colorful and condensed by different laws. As soon as they appear, a heavy pressure spreads out, causing the air to become strongly distorted. Lin couldn't help but his eyes fluctuated slightly. If these laws were activated by Eternal, Lin An wouldn't even need to take action, but with just one thought, Lin An's will would be enough to cause these laws to collapse and disperse on their own, and the phantoms of these palms would naturally be destroyed. This is the strength of eternity. From eternity, everyone is just an ant. Even if thousands of gods come to confront Eternal God, it is just a matter that can be solved in a single thought, and there will be no trouble at all. However, when these palms are in Eternal's hands, These laws have unique will control and can no longer be forcibly destroyed by will. If you want to resist, you can only use your will to condense the laws to fight against it and fight hard. Lin An's eyes flashed with some understanding, and he raised his hand and waved forward. In an instant, a total of 9 long swords suddenly emerged from Lin An's light shield, and Lin An's will was contained in them. This 9-rayed purple gold sword seems to be exactly the same as what Lin An condensed in the past, but only eternity can sense that this long sword is already in the same sky and on the earth as before. With the blessing of complete will, the roots of these long swords have been changed and are completely condensed at this moment. As soon as they appeared, the will of destruction began to disperse from them, and they rushed directly towards the colorful palms not far away. And go. With a hint of exploration in Lin An's eyes, he controlled the long sword and launched an offensive. The light blue shadow on the opposite side seemed to be angered again, and the fluctuations in his will were a little more intense again. Immediately, there was a steady stream of phantom palms appearing behind him. Lin An's expression remained unchanged, he just looked at his purple gold sword, which seemed to be moving like a broken bamboo, moving towards the shadow of the opposite palm. The collision finally unfolds. With the blessing of will, these long swords have destructive will waves emerging. The moment they touch the shadow of the palm, they show extremely strong offensive power. Lin An clearly felt that at the tip of his sword, there were actually various laws such as the law of sharpness and the law of solidity. It suddenly became countless times stronger. At that moment, it actually had unimaginable penetrating power, directly cutting the palm of his hand. Completely penetrated. Lin couldn't help but his eyes flashed, and he saw something different. His purple gold sword is a collection of countless laws, but it itself is just a collection of laws. But what just happened? His purple gold sword strengthened the strength of some of the laws on its own. It was as if with the blessing of Lin An's will, the several laws in the purple gold sword were in perfect harmony, allowing it to explode with even more powerful power. Lin An's will immediately became stronger. At this moment, there was only one message in Lin An's will, and that was destruction. Under Lin An's will, the speed of the 9 purple gold swords suddenly increased again, and in an instant, they broke several more phantoms of the palms, really like breaking bamboo with force. It wasn't until more than 10 palm shadows were broken in succession that Lin An's purple gold sword seemed to have consumed all its power. It couldn't bear the last palm shadow and collapsed into countless fragments. Could it be said that the emergence of will can increase the intensity of the law? There was something strange in Lin An's eyes. When he raised his hand, 3 more black gold swords appeared. The huge will spread out, and Lin An's thoughts spread instantly, just like the power of God crushing him. Collapse. Under the will of this meaning, the 3 black gold swords in front of Lin An shone brightly for an instant, and even the size of the sword body expanded in an instant. It even tripled in size in an instant. More than enough. As soon as the 3 big swords expanded, they headed towards the dense phantom of palms in front, and there was a strong Honkai will covering them. It seemed that the Honkai aura above had really expanded countless times. Lin An's eyes were filled with excitement, and his guess seemed to be in the right direction. In Lin An's eyes, the 3 big swords showed strong power as soon as they came close to the colorful palm. Before they touched it, the shadow of the opposite palm started to collapse on its own. Although the intensity of this kind of collapse is not severe, it is enough to cause an unimaginable weakening effect. And in the ensuing collision, the phantom of the palm was like fragile porcelain. It was full of cracks in an instant, and then the whole thing exploded. What exploded was not only the palm itself, but also the wool attached to it, which dissipated together under the effect of collapse. Lin An couldn't help but shrink his pupils violently. His collapse has now reached the eternal level, and even his will can collapse. You know, when Lin An was in Xuanhuan, he also touched the edge of will, but at that time he didn't show any such potential. And the 3 black gold swords, after collapsing the palm, the impact did not decrease at all, but became more and more intense, and began to collide with the palm behind. Just 3 long swords are enough to impact the countless palm prints. On the other side, the light blue shadow saw the scene with his own eyes, and the fluctuations in the will began to vibrate violently again, causing the boundless palm prints to begin to transform one after another. After expanding 10 times, the increase in size is just the beginning, followed by the change of fluctuations on it. In Lin En's perception, that kind of fluctuation was actually endless murderous intent. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 440. Lin En couldn't imagine why the other party had such a terrifying murderous intent. Under the spread of such a will, everything he saw seemed to be covered with a layer of blood. And under the blessing of this will, the huge handprints in front of him also changed colors one after another, and a touch of blood soon spread all over the palm. It turned into a series of bloody palm prints. Lin En's eyes condensed, and a layer of fog seemed to appear in his heart. Who is this light blue figure? The moment he saw him, Lin En had already judged that the other party could not be the origin of the earth. The will and aura on him were completely different from the will of heaven and earth that suppressed Lin En before. Moreover, the origin of the earth is the source of the will of heaven and earth. How could there be such a huge murderous intent? But if it is not the origin of the earth, what kind of existence is the other party? It is just a phantom. Lin En can only think of the mysterious existence in the depths of the universe. But the aura of the phantom in front of him seems to be different from that one. Although he was full of doubts, Lin En's movements were not slow. He raised his hand and waved it forward again. With one wave, what appeared in front of him was an even more exaggerated huge will. If Lin En had just been testing, then now was the display of Lin En's true strength. The vast and huge will spread in an instant. The opponent's will originally occupied 80% of the area here, but in an instant, it was forcibly dispelled by Lin En's will. At this moment, the stone cave seemed to be divided into 2 worlds. The small half was the killing world of the light blue shadow, and the other large half was shrouded in endless collapse will. And under the crushing of such a huge will, the next thing that was generated was the collapse aura that spread out. The 3 black gold swords before, but in an instant, expanded several times again, and around them, there were more than a dozen collapse swords condensed. Lin En's instantaneous burst was even more powerful than the momentum of the light blue shadow. As the black gold giant sword enlarged, the aura of collapse on the giant sword also rose to the extreme in an instant, and began to attack the blood-colored giant hand. Boom! The terrifying roar began in the stone cave, echoing continuously. At this moment, at least 10 collisions occurred in the stone cave, whether it was Lin En's black gold giant sword or the blood-colored giant palm on the opposite side, they all began to tremble violently. Under the violent tremor, the giant sword and the giant palm also began to consume rapidly. The tip of the giant sword seemed to be rapidly melting under the erosion of the giant palm, and there was also a shocking sword mark on the palm of the giant palm that was constantly deepening. Continuous bombardment, endless. There was a giant palm, the entire palm was penetrated by a bang, and there was also a giant sword, starting from the tip of the sword, melting all the way to the hilt, and then the whole sword melted away. However, behind them, there were new giant palms and giant swords, which filled the gap in an instant and rushed towards each other, and a new round of collision began again. Time passed bit by bit. I don't know how long this collision lasted, how many black gold giant swords disappeared, and how many bloody giant palms collapsed. At this moment, Lin En's eyes showed some strange colors. With a thought, the will that permeated the entire space in front of him suddenly began to disappear. To be precise, it was not a pure disappearance, but the result of contraction and condensation. The will in front began to condense on the black gold giant sword, making the brilliance on each black gold giant sword seem to be stronger. And as Lin En's will changed, those black gold giant swords began to change silently, but after a few breaths, they still turned into black gold dragons. Lin En's expression appeared a little solemn. At this moment, suddenly a thought moved, and a different will quietly emerged. This is destruction. As Lin En controlled his mind, the breath of the law began to appear on the field. They gathered and contracted, and soon condensed into a purple gold light, which became stronger and brighter, and soon condensed into the shape of purple gold dragons. Lin En's eyes were a little excited. 2 dragons appear. As Lin En's words came out, those purple gold dragons appeared next to a black gold dragon, and then the 2 dragons began to coil and circle, like huge tornadoes. Sure enough, will can have a strong blessing on the law or collapse, so the higher the cohesion of will, the stronger the effect of blessing. Now I am splitting my mind and forming 2 wills to bless the law and collapse respectively. It is true that at this ancient level, I have also released the 2 dragons of that day. Thoughts flashed through his mind, and Lin En's eyes were rarely excited, and the will that spread on his body could not help but become stronger. Under this blessing, the heads of the 2 winding dragons in front seemed to be more ferocious, and the waves of collapse and destruction became stronger. In contrast, the blood-colored giant palm on the opposite side trembled violently under the attack of this rotating impact, especially in the center where the dragon heads gathered, and cracks soon began to appear. As time passed, the cracks became stronger and stronger, and soon, they spread all over the palm. Boom! A deafening explosion sound began to appear, and Lin En looked closely and saw that a blood-colored giant palm exploded into countless fragments. The collapse of this palm was like a signal. Within the next few breaths, other bloody palms also began to collapse one after another. The continuous roaring sounds were like fireworks. Aha! Lin En's cold eyes instantly fell on the light blue figure opposite. Almost. Lin En's thoughts moved, and several double dragons in front of him roared towards the light blue shadow. At this moment, the light blue figure couldn't see any expression, but his movements could be seen clearly. He waved his hand casually, and a light blue light curtain appeared in front of him. Lin En's eyes flashed with suspicion. That's it? Can this thing withstand so much power from the double dragon? However, what surprised Lin En was that several double dragons bombarded the light curtain almost at the same time, and did not smash it into pieces in an instant. Under Lin En's gaze, this light blue light curtain actually lasted for a full breath before it collapsed into countless fragments as countless cracks spread. Lin En couldn't help but be a little surprised. What level of defense was this? Under the attack of so many double dragons, it was able to last for a full breath.